This video is intended to highlight the most critical steps of the technical instructions for Safety Recall ALE on Lexus GS 460, LS 460, and LS 600H models. Only some of the steps for this repair will be shown. Be careful when performing this procedure. If steps are overlooked or performed incorrectly, additional repairs may be necessary, affecting the customer's perception on the quality of the repair. Refer to the technical instructions for steps not shown in this video, as well as additional information. After removing the valve covers, the spark plug tubes and oil galleys should be plugged with shop towels. The spark plug tubes are marked in yellow. The oil galleys are marked in red. This will prevent foreign objects from entering the engine. Be sure to remove the shop towels prior to reinstalling the valve covers. Caution: when performing this repair, work on one bank at a time. If the camshafts are removed on both banks at the same time, it is probable that the chain will bind or skip teeth. Before disassembling valve train components, it is necessary to properly align the crankshaft and camshafts to ensure correct engine timing during reassembly. Begin by rotating the crankshaft pulley so cylinder 1 is at top dead center. When the pulley notch is aligned with the 0-degree mark, cylinder 1 is at top dead center. Confirm the timing marks on the VVT gears are facing up. If you cannot see the marks, rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees. Using a paint marker, draw a line on the bearing caps in line with the VVT gear timing marks on both intake and exhaust camshafts. Throughout this step, insert a 1/8-inch pin through the lever arm hole and the tensioner lock hole at any point these two holes align. Begin by placing a plastic wedge in between the chain and guide. Rotate the crankshaft counterclockwise. This step will bleed enough oil pressure to lock the tensioner. Do not use a pry bar or metal wedge for this step. It can damage the plastic chain guide. Once the lever arm hole is aligned, insert the pin to lock the tensioner. Place a shop towel in the access hole to hold the pin in place. Warning: if the pin falls out of the tensioner after the VVT gears have been removed from the camshafts, the tensioner plunger will extend. If this occurs, reinstallation of the VVT gears is very difficult. Do not pry on the lever arm to force it into position. This will damage the tensioner. From top dead center, rotate the crankshaft 110 degrees counterclockwise. This step is necessary to relieve spring pressure from the bearing caps. Confirm the lobes are not depressing the valves. If the spring pressure is not reduced, the bearing caps can break. In this position, and using a different colored paint marker, mark the intake VVT gear, primary chain, secondary chain, intake camshaft, and the bearing cap. Next, mark the exhaust VVT gear, secondary chain, exhaust camshaft, and bearing cap. Next, while holding the hexagonal portion of the camshaft with a wrench, loosen the VVT gear bolts. Remove and discard the intake bolt. Using a special service tool, loosen the exhaust bolt until it contacts the timing cover. Use caution when performing the following steps. If not done properly, the FIPG seal between the camshaft housing and cylinder head will crack, causing future oil leaks. When removing camshaft bearing caps, use the proper sequence as described in the technical instructions. Loosen the bolts to each cap in several increments, beginning with the black bolts. Do not use air tools. If this step is not done properly, the bearing cap may break. As each cap is removed, it is necessary to install a hold-down bolt to prevent damage to the seal. The hold-down bolts and washers were included in the V6 Special Service Toolkit. Install the hold-down bolts with 2 washers. The washers are used to prevent damage to the dowel pins. Be careful when performing the following steps. Do not force any of the components. They will move when the steps are performed properly. Once all the bearing cap's bolts and all but the front cap have been removed, lift the front cap above the dowel pins. It is okay if the chain tensioner pulls the bearing cap back down. Evenly walk out both VVT gears from the camshafts while pushing down on the tensioner. Next, remove the bearing cap. Remove the exhaust camshaft and then the exhaust VVT gear. Hold the intake VVT gear and remove the intake camshaft and secondary chain. Be sure to keep tension on the primary chain. Now, secure the intake VVT gear and primary chain to the timing cover. If the chain and gear are not secured tightly, the chain may bind or skip teeth on the crankshaft, resulting in incorrect timing. Once the camshafts have been removed, the rocker arms, stem caps, and lash adjusters must be removed. Use a strong magnet to remove these parts. New rocker arms and stem caps are not included in the parts kit. It is important to keep these parts well organized because they must be installed on the same valve from which they were removed. While turning the crankshaft and walking the intake VVT gear, position cylinder 1 to top dead center. Next, the cylinders need to be pressurized with a provided special service tool. Perform this 4-step check to ensure the tool is working properly. First, close the valve at the regulator and set the pressure to a specified value. Check for air leaks. Confirm air adapter O-rings are installed and in good condition. Attach the air adapters and supply air to the adapters to remove any debris. Next, install and hand tighten the air adapters and attach the air hoses. Slowly open the regulator valve. Check for air leaks and repair the leaks before proceeding. A hissing sound from small leaks will exist. This condition is normal. Follow these basic rules when replacing the valves. Before removing valve springs from a cylinder, raise the piston in that cylinder to top dead center. This will prevent a valve from completely dropping into the cylinder if the shop air pressure is lost. Without unsecuring the intake VVT gear, slowly walk the gear and chain while turning the crankshaft. The V8 toolkit includes several components required for valve spring removal and installation. One attachment will be used for removal and one for installation. Be sure to use the correct tool for the step you are working on. Always wear protective eyewear when working with valve spring removal and installation. Attach the SST uprights to the engine using the camshaft cap hold-down bolts. The first upright should be bolted in place of the rearmost camshaft cap. The second should be bolted at the camshaft cap location between cylinder 1 and 3. Next, insert the crossbar through the uprights in the lower set of holes. Install the lever with the pin hole toward the valve spring that will be removed. Install the removal attachment on the lever with the supplied pin. Position the attachment evenly across the retainer. Use a 3/8" ratchet on the lever to compress the valve spring. The magnets in the tool will capture the keepers and retainer. Remove and mark the valve spring to ensure it is not reinstalled. Before installing the new valve spring, ensure the valve spring seat is still in place. Then, install the new valve spring. Once the valve spring has been replaced, the retainers and keepers must be reinstalled. Place the retainer in your hand, facing up. Install the keepers into the retainer and attach them to the provided installation tool. Ensure the spring-loaded guide shaft is fully extended, or the retainer and keepers will fall off. When the guide shaft is fully extended, it will protrude past the retainer. Connect the installation attachment to the lever with the supplied pin. Position the attachment so the guide pin will be pressed straight in by the valve stem. Compress the spring. Once the spring is sufficiently compressed, the retainer and keepers will be installed on the valve. If the keepers are not at an even height around the valve stem and fit tightly in the retainer, they are not installed correctly. Do not force the keeper into place with the valve keeper seat tool. Remove the parts and repeat the installation process using the valve spring installation tool. The keepers should be recessed into the retainer and at an even level around the valve stem. Place the valve keeper seat tool on the keepers. Lightly tap the tool a few times. After removing the tool, visually inspect the installation of the keepers. Repeat these steps for all valves in the cylinder. Once all the valves for one cylinder are finished, close the regulator valve and remove air pressure. Remove the crossbar. Then remove the air adapter from cylinder 7. Rotate the crank to raise the piston to top dead center in the next cylinder to be repaired. Be careful to rotate the VVT timing gear and chain as the crank is rotated. Reconnect the air adapter and air line. Then, connect the air supply hose and open the valve to supply air to the cylinders. Repeat the steps for valve spring replacement on this cylinder. Repeat these procedures for the 2 remaining cylinders on this bank. Careful. When working on the rear cylinders, take special care to ensure the keepers are properly seated. Visibility is limited. Once all the valve springs have been replaced, the new lash adjusters must be installed. Before installation, the air must be bled from the lash adjusters. Locate the SST required for this step. Submerge the lash adjuster in clean engine oil and insert the tool straight into the lash adjuster. It is critical that the SST is properly inserted to depress the check ball in the lash adjuster. While submerged, Hold the tool and lash adjuster vertically. If it is not held vertically, it will not bleed properly. Pump the SST at least 6 times. Remove the tool and firmly push the lash adjuster to check that the plunger barely moves. Resubmerge the lash adjuster to fill the low pressure side. Repeat these steps for each lash adjuster. If there is more than slight movement, the air has not been completely removed. Repeat the bleeding procedure. Insert and twist the lash adjuster for proper installation. After all lash adjusters have been installed, the stem caps should be reinstalled. Install the rocker arm installation guide tool provided in the V8 toolkit. This tool will support the exhaust rocker arms during camshaft installation. When installing the rocker arms, it is helpful to put engine assembly lube on the rocker arm to hold it in place on the valve stem and lash adjuster. It is critical that the rocker arms are properly seated when the camshafts are reinstalled. When installed correctly, the valve stem and lash adjuster should fit into recesses in the bottom of the rocker arm. If the rocker is incorrectly installed, it will not fit evenly across the lash adjuster and valve stem. Installing the camshaft with this condition will lead to poor performance and engine damage. Continue reassembly by applying oil to the journals. Ensure the engine is set at 110 degrees before TDC. It is necessary to reinstall the camshafts, VVT gears, and bearing caps. Unsecure the VVT gear, but be sure to hold tension on the primary timing chain. Install the secondary timing chain on the intake VVT gear. Align the painted mark on the VVT gear with the painted area of the secondary chain. Install the intake camshaft onto the camshaft housing. Only partially install the intake VVT gear at this point. Next, move the exhaust VVT gear in place. Be sure the exhaust camshaft bolt is set inside the gear. Align the painted chain links to the painted mark on the gear. Using the paint marks for alignment, partially reinstall the exhaust VVT gear. Then install the camshaft into the housing. Slide the VVT gears away from the camshafts. Then install the front bearing cap with tensioner. Position the secondary chain on the tensioner. It will be necessary to reposition the chain on the chain guide. Using a long flat blade screwdriver, reinstall the bottom part of the timing chain onto the chain guide by moving the timing chain past the guide lip. Next, push the VVT gear into the camshaft until the chain is centered in the upper and lower chain guides. Notice how the guide is repositioned on the engine without a timing cover. Be patient on this step. Take care not to damage the guide. It can be difficult to reposition the chain in the guide. Using the second set of paint marks, confirm the left-hand bank has been correctly timed. Install and hand tighten the new intake VVT gear bolt. The exhaust VVT gear bolt will be reused. It should be installed and hand tightened. Do not torque these bolts until the bearing caps have been reinstalled. Before installing the bearing cap bolts, it's necessary to degrease and dry the bolts and bolt holes. Following the sequence specified in the technical instructions, loosen and remove the hold-down bolts and washers one at a time. Then reinstall the corresponding bearing cap. Only remove hold-down bolts for one bearing cap at a time. With the hold-down bolts removed, install and incrementally tighten the bolts. Torque the bolts to the specified value and then move on to the next bearing cap location. Warning: if a bolt seems to bind or stretch, replace the bolt. Once the camshafts and bearing caps have been reinstalled, remove the rocker arm guide installation tool. Confirm all rocker arms are in the correct position. A consistent U-shaped distance should be seen below all rocker arms. When working on the rear cylinders, take special care to ensure the rocker arms are properly located. Visibility is limited. While holding the hexagonal portion of the camshaft, torque the VVT gear bolts. It will be necessary to use the SST to tighten the exhaust bolt. Remove the lock pin and shop towel from the access hole. Then reinstall the tensioner access plug. To confirm the engine has been correctly timed and reassembled, rotate the crankshaft approximately 720 degrees to top dead center. Pay close attention for any binding or abnormalities. If the engine does not rotate smoothly, diagnose and repair before completing reassembly steps. Check that the original timing marks realign with the first set of paint marks on the bearing cap. This step will confirm the engine has been correctly timed. The steps for the right-hand bank are similar to the left-hand bank, but not identical. This portion of the video will highlight the primary differences between the left and right-hand banks. Refer to the technical instructions for the specific steps required. Rotate the crank to allow a pin to be inserted in the tensioner. It is not necessary to use the wedge tool on this bank. To reduce spring pressure on the right-hand bank, rotate the crankshaft 20 degrees counterclockwise from top dead center. Confirm that the lobes are not depressing the valves. If the spring pressure is not reduced, the bearing caps can break. In this position, and using a different colored paint marker, mark the intake VVT gear, primary chain, secondary chain, intake camshaft, and the bearing cap. Next, mark the exhaust VVT gear, secondary chain, exhaust camshaft, and bearing cap. While holding the camshafts, loosen the VVT gear bolts and remove the intake VVT bolt. Use caution when performing the following steps. If not done properly, the FIPG seal between the camshaft housing and the cylinder head will crack, causing future oil leaks. Similar to the left-hand bank, use the proper sequence to remove the camshaft bearing caps and install the provided hold-down bolts with washers. Remember, do not use air tools. If this step is not done properly, the bearing cap may break. Once all the bearing cap bolts and all but the front cap have been removed, Lift the front cap above the dowel pins. Pulling both VVT gears evenly, walk them outward from the camshafts. Remove the front bearing cap with secondary chain tensioner, followed by the removal of the camshafts and exhaust VVT gear. The valve spring and lash adjuster replacement steps are similar for both banks. Refer to the technical instructions for more details. After the valve springs and lash adjusters have been replaced, it's time to reassemble the right-hand bank. Reinstall the intake camshaft and timing gears similarly to the left-hand bank. Next, install the exhaust camshaft. Note that the plunger portion of the secondary chain tensioner is facing downward. This requires a different installation procedure. While holding the exhaust camshaft and gear assembly, install the secondary chain tensioner into the secondary chain. Then, lower the assembly into position. Complete the remaining steps for camshaft bearing cap installation. Similarly to the left bank, ensure correct timing and assembly by rotating the crankshaft 720 degrees to top dead center. Check that the original timing marks realign.